When I first stepped into the new house, a strange calm settled in my chest. The walls were freshly painted, the wooden floor still smelled faintly of polish, and the windows let in sunlight that scattered across the empty rooms like golden ribbons. It was not a mansion, not even clothes, it was a modest home tucked into the quiet edge of a leafy suburb, but for me, it was freedom. I had lived for years in crowded apartments where walls were too thin, neighbors were strangers, and life was nothing but a rush of obligations. But here, in this little house with its overgrown garden and creaky front gate, I felt as if I could finally breathe. That first morning, I set down boxes, made a pot of coffee, and stood by the front porch to take in the neighborhood. Across the street, the lawns were trimmed neatly, cars rested in driveways, and children's bicycles leaned lazily against fences. The place felt alive, but in a quiet, reserved way. And then, I saw her. The woman who would become the center of my story. She was standing at the edge of her yard, pruning a rosebush with delicate care. Her hair was silver but long, flowing down her back like silk spun with time. She wore a simple cardigan, her shoulders a little bent, but her presence was strangely luminous, as though the sun lingered longer on her skin. Our eyes met, and she smiled. A smile that wasn't just polite, but searching. "Good morning," I called across the street. She lowered her shears, tilted her head, and said, "You must be the new neighbor." I nodded. "Just moved in yesterday." For a moment, she studied me with an intensity that was both unsettling and comforting, like she was looking past the surface of me and into something deeper. Then she said words that I didn't quite know how to carry. "You help me feel seen." I froze, the coffee cup halfway to my lips. What could she mean? She didn't know me, I had just arrived. But her voice carried no exaggeration, no small talk, just an honesty that landed softly yet heavily in my heart. I smiled awkwardly, gave a small wave, and went back inside. But her words kept echoing. "You help me feel seen." Over the next few days, I noticed her more. Her name, as I learned from another neighbor, was Margaret. She lived alone in the house across from mine. Her husband had died years ago, her children had long since moved away, and now she spent her days tending her roses, sitting on the porch with a book, or walking slowly down the street with a cane she rarely seemed to need. I should have left it at that, a kind elderly neighbor living her quiet life. But something about her words had hooked me, pulling me closer without my permission. One afternoon, while unpacking, I found myself baking cookies from a recipe my mother had once loved. On impulse, I carried a plate across the street and knocked on her door. The door opened, and Margaret's eyes softened. "Oh," she said, "you brought something." "Just cookies," I smiled, holding them out. She invited me in. Her house smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The walls were lined with photographs. Children in graduation gowns, a man in uniform, family gatherings at long tables. It was a museum of a life well lived, yet paused. We sat at her kitchen table, and as she tasted the cookies, her eyes shimmered. I haven't had anyone bring me something homemade in years. We talked for an hour. About the roses she grew, about my reasons for moving, about nothing and everything. She laughed at small things I said, and I realized how warm her laughter sounded in that quiet house. When I left, she touched my arm gently and whispered again, "You help me feel seen." This time, I didn't brush it aside. This time, I let the words sink in. The days became weeks, and soon, Margaret and I fell into a rhythm. Every morning, I would wave to her from my porch as she watered her roses. Every evening, I would sometimes join her for tea, listening to stories of her youth, her travels, the little triumphs and heartbreaks that made up her tapestry of years. And in return, I shared pieces of myself I rarely shared with anyone, my doubts, my restlessness, the loneliness I had carried quietly through crowded cities. She listened as if every word I said mattered. As if I mattered. It dawned on me one evening, as I watched the sunset burn orange behind her, that she wasn't just grateful for my presence, I was grateful for hers. Her words, "You help me feel seen," were not just hers. They had become mine too. Because in her gentle eyes, I felt seen in ways I hadn't before. But the story wasn't always easy. There were days when I found Margaret sitting silently on her porch, her eyes far away, as if reliving shadows of a past she didn't speak of. When I asked, she would smile faintly and change the subject. One rainy afternoon, I found her in her garden, kneeling in the mud, clutching a rose stem so tightly that blood trickled from her palm where the thorns had cut her. I rushed to her side, lifting her gently, and asked what happened. Tears slid down her face. Sometimes, she whispered, I wonder if I still exist, if anyone remembers me as I was. I bandaged her hand, held her close, and said the only thing I could. I see you, Margaret. I see you. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and sorrow, as though my words had touched something fragile and hidden. Time passed, and our bond deepened. I became her companion for grocery trips, her helper in the garden, her listener when memories weighed heavy. She, in turn, became my anchor, grounding me in a world that often felt too fast and impersonal. Neighbors began to notice. Some whispered kindly, others curiously. But I didn't care, because I knew what she meant to me, and what I meant to her. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted like golden fire around us, Margaret took my hand and said, When you came here, I thought I had already lived all the important parts of my life. But you made me realize I still matter. You gave me back the gift of being seen. I squeezed her hand, and you gave me the same gift. Months turned into a year. Margaret grew frailer, her steps slower, her silences longer. But our bond never dimmed. I was there with her through doctor's visits, through sleepless nights, through moments when the weight of time pressed hard. And then, one winter morning, she didn't come to her porch. I knocked, and when there was no answer, I entered quietly. She was in her chair, a book resting on her lap, her face peaceful as if she had simply drifted into another dream. Tears blurred my vision as I knelt beside her. She was gone. On her table lay a letter, folded neatly. It was addressed to me. Inside, in her delicate handwriting, were the words, You helped me feel seen in the last chapter of my life. And that was the greatest gift anyone could have given me. Carry it forward. Help others be seen, as you helped me. I buried her beneath the roses she loved. The neighbors gathered, speaking of her kindness, her quiet strength, her gentle soul. And as I stood there, I realized that Margaret had not left me empty. She had left me with a truth I would carry always. That to see someone, to truly see them, is to give them life. From that day forward, I tried to live differently. To look people in the eyes, to listen deeply, to remind them they mattered. And in doing so, I felt Margaret with me, always. Because she had been right all along. Sometimes, what we need most is not riches, not applause, not even answers. Sometimes, what we need most is simply to feel seen.